Here's something worth letting sink in. The richest people in the world break down like this. 75% are entrepreneurs, 15% are investors, 7% inherited their wealth, 3% are athletes, entertainers, or artists, and 0%, essentially nobody, got there purely as an employee earning a salary. So if you want to understand how the top 1% actually manage money, look at what those first four groups have in common. Entrepreneurs own businesses. Investors own assets. Wealthy heirs own trusts. Athletes and entertainers own rare, valuable skills. The pattern is simple. If you don't own something, you are what's owned instead. That's the core insight most people miss. So how do you actually start owning things the way the top 1% do? Here's a simple framework, the 25-15-50-10 rule. It works regardless of income level, because building wealth was never really about how much you earn. It's about how you manage what you already make. The first 25%, growth. The first 25% of your income should go toward growth, money that works for you instead of the other way around. This means buying things that increase in value over time, not vague self-improvement, actual assets. Most people get paid, cover their bills, then spend the rest on things they barely remember buying a week later. That's exactly why so many people end up owning nothing of real value. In a lot of ways, this cycle is by design. Rich for a week after payday, broke by the end of the month, with no breathing room, forced to work even harder just to keep pace. It's worth pausing on that comparison for a second. In the past, people worked without pay, but received food, shelter, and water in return. Today, people work and get paid, but that pay mostly goes right back out toward food, shelter, and housing. The core arrangement hasn't changed as much as it looks like it has, just the illusion of freedom around it. Once you see that pattern clearly, you can start pushing back. Take that first 25% and put it directly into assets, anything that grows in value and eventually puts money back in your pocket. While you're at your job, these assets keep working quietly in the background. Eventually, they can out-earn your actual paycheck entirely. Here's an example that illustrates why starting early matters more than starting big. Picture two people, Billy and Phil. Billy starts investing $200 a month at age 20. Phil waits until 30, then invests $300 a month to catch up. Both stop investing at 60. Billy ends up contributing $200 monthly for 40 years, totaling $96,000. Phil contributes $300 monthly for 30 years, totaling $108,000. More money put in overall. You'd assume Phil ends up ahead, except assuming a 10% average annual return, roughly the historical average of the S&P 500 over the past century, the numbers flip completely. Phil's investment grows to about $678,000. Billy's grows to roughly $1,264,000. Billy put in $12,000 less overall, yet ended up with nearly $600,000 more, purely because he started 10 years earlier. That's the power of compound growth. And it's exactly why starting now, even with a small amount, matters more than waiting to start big later. So how do you actually get started? First, choose your growth assets. There are countless ways to grow money, but they don't all carry the same risk or reward. Think of them on a spectrum, from relatively steady to genuinely high risk. On the lower risk end sit index funds, and honestly, this is where most people should begin. You're not trying to pick individual winners, you're simply buying a small slice of the entire market, like the S&P 500. No chart watching, no timing the market, just letting it grow quietly in the background. Next up is real estate, either rental property if you have the capital, or REITs if you don't. A REIT lets you invest in real estate without buying property outright, essentially owning a small share of a building alongside many other investors. In the middle of the risk spectrum sits skill building. Learning a genuinely valuable, income-generating skill, copywriting, editing, sales, coding, tends to produce the fastest return on investment you'll ever see. Unlike stocks or property, nobody can take a skill away from you. It just takes real time to develop, which is why it sits higher on the risk scale than index funds or REITs. Further up are online businesses, things like dropshipping or selling digital products. These can pay off significantly, but they demand real effort and usually a few failed attempts before something clicks. Then come individual stocks. It's tempting to try picking the next breakout company, but without real research, you're essentially guessing. If you go this route without deep knowledge, keep the amount small and treat it like a hobby, not your core strategy. At the top of the risk spectrum sit alternative investments: Bitcoin, Ethereum, NFTs, gold, wine, collectible sneakers. You can genuinely make money here. You can also lose it overnight just as easily. These are moonshots, fun to experiment with, but not where long-term wealth actually gets built. A sensible starting point is index funds and high-income skills specifically, since those build a genuine foundation. Once you feel more confident, you can gradually explore the higher risk categories. Now that you know what to invest in, how you invest matters just as much. The wrong account type can quietly hand over thousands in unnecessary taxes. In the UK, one strong option is the Stocks and Shares ISA, letting you invest up to £20,000 a year completely tax-free on any gains. If you're working a standard job, you likely have access to a workplace pension too, commonly with a 5% employee contribution matched by a 3% employer contribution, essentially free money, with taxes deferred until withdrawal later in life. In the US, the Roth IRA is one of the strongest available accounts. You invest money you've already paid tax on, but everything it earns afterward grows completely tax-free, and withdrawals in retirement are tax-free too. The contribution limit sits at $7,000 annually if you're under 50. Even billionaires use this account strategically. Peter Thiel, a PayPal co-founder, reportedly grew his Roth IRA into over $5 billion by investing early in high-growth companies, including PayPal and Facebook themselves. Then there's the 401k, essentially the American version of a pension. Contributions come out of your paycheck before tax, grow untaxed while invested, and if your employer offers any matching contribution, that's genuinely worth taking advantage of. Whatever country you're in, look specifically for whatever tax-advantaged account structure your government offers, since taking advantage of it meaningfully compounds your long-term returns. Here's the part people often get wrong though. Opening these accounts and depositing money monthly without actually investing that money into anything. Simply holding cash inside a tax-advantaged account doesn't generate growth on its own. The most reliable approach is setting up an automatic transfer from your bank account directly into your investment platform, ideally timed with payday. That way, you never see the money sitting there tempting you to spend it. Once it lands, there's no need to obsess over charts or timing. A commonly used approach is building what's called a 3-fund portfolio. The first fund typically covers the US stock market broadly, investing across major companies like Apple and Amazon. The second fund covers international stocks, similar exposure but for companies outside the US. The third fund is a bond fund, generally less volatile than stocks, which helps smooth out the portfolio's overall ups and downs. A reasonable allocation might lean more aggressively towards stocks when you're younger, say 90% stocks and 10% bonds. This accepts more short-term volatility in exchange for higher long-term growth potential. As you age, gradually shifting toward a higher bond allocation, perhaps 60% in a core stock index fund, 30% in international stocks, and 10% in bonds, tends to reduce volatility as retirement approaches. Once this is automated, your actual job becomes simple. Stop fiddling with it and focus instead on increasing your income. Wealth tends to come from consistently investing more over time, not from picking flashy individual stocks. This is where the earlier skill building point becomes genuinely useful. Learn something valuable, turn it into a side income, and feed that extra income straight back into your investments. The next 15%, stability. The next 15% of your income should go towards stability, the portion that keeps you in the game long enough for growth to actually work. A lot of people don't realize that not every dollar should go toward growth or spending. Some needs to be set aside specifically to protect the progress you've already made. Here's a personal example of learning this the hard way. At 18, needing a car to get to work but with no savings built up, a loan was taken out to buy a used car, along with a new stereo using extra loan money. Everything felt fine for a few months, until the engine failed entirely. With no financial cushion and no backup plan, more debt had to be taken on just to keep the car running and the job intact. That single car breakdown effectively set an entire year of financial progress backward. Most people don't actually have a fundamental money problem. They have a stability problem. One unexpected expense, and the whole plan collapses. Even active investors can get forced into selling investments at exactly the wrong moment during an emergency, locking in real losses. That's why building margin for error into your finances matters as much as growth itself. Start by calculating your stability fund. List out your core monthly expenses: groceries, rent, utilities, transportation, and essential services like internet needed for actual work. Add these together to get your monthly baseline. Say that comes to $1,500 a month. Multiply that by 5 months, giving a target stability fund of $7,500 in this example. Each month, 15% of income should go toward building this figure until it's fully funded. This might sound cautious, and it genuinely is. But real emergencies tend to arrive suddenly and all at once, without warning, so having only a month or two saved often isn't enough of a buffer. Where this money gets stored matters just as much as having it in the first place. 3 rules apply here. First, it needs to be genuinely accessible, ideally within 24 hours, not locked into an account that penalizes early withdrawal or restricts access for years in exchange for slightly higher interest. Second, it needs to carry essentially zero risk. This money should never sit in the stock market, even conservative index funds, since markets can be down exactly when an emergency hits. The same logic applies to crypto or long-term bonds. Third, it should still earn something modest while it waits. Parking it somewhere earning zero interest means inflation quietly erodes its real value over time. High-yield savings accounts currently offering 4 to 5% interest with no withdrawal penalties are a solid option here. To build this fund faster than expected, 3 simple tactics compound well together. The first is the paycheck sweep, automatically moving 15% of income into the stability fund the moment it lands, fully automated just like the growth contribution. The second is the replacement promise, a personal commitment that any money withdrawn from this fund gets replaced in full the very next paycheck. The third is the save by spending approach. Using roundup apps that round every purchase to the nearest dollar and deposit the difference into savings, or redirecting cashback rewards from a credit card paid off in full each month directly into this fund. Once the stability fund is fully built, any additional money can either roll into growth investments or shift toward the final category. The next 50%, essentials. The next 50% of income should cover essentials, the portion that keeps you fed and functioning, not the portion that feeds your ego. Surprisingly, over 60% of Americans earning more than $100,000 annually still live paycheck to paycheck, largely because effort goes into looking wealthy rather than actually becoming wealthy. Income level alone doesn't determine financial security. What matters is how much gets wasted relative to what comes in. Here's an illustration of that gap. At age 20, someone dressed in designer clothes and an expensive watch, always spending freely, actually had $43.20 in his account with overdue credit card payments. Meanwhile, dressed plainly in basics, someone else had over $1,000 quietly sitting in investments, plus a solid stability fund built up after learning hard lessons from an earlier financial setback. Wealth genuinely isn't what you see. It's what you don't see. It's easy to rationalize lifestyle upgrades, a safer car, a house closer to work, a meal that's deserved. But that reasoning is exactly how lifestyle creep begins. Start by getting genuinely clear on what counts as essential. Many things people label essential today are actually just comfortable luxuries. True essentials are what keep you alive and functioning: rent or mortgage, groceries, utilities, transportation, insurance, and basic clothing, not the latest designer release. What doesn't count includes takeout, forgotten subscriptions, unused gym memberships, and streaming services you keep meaning to cancel. Going through bank statements and canceling anything genuinely unused is one of the simplest ways to free up meaningful money. Why cap this category at 50% specifically? Because the average person already spends 60 to 70% of income on things they consider essential. Capping it deliberately at 50% forces a genuine evaluation of what's truly necessary versus habitual. It also shifts mindset gradually, from wanting to spend more of current income toward wanting to earn more overall. 2 categories matter most when trimming the spending, far more than small daily purchases like coffee. The first is housing, typically the largest expense for most people, though it doesn't need to grow proportionally with income. Renegotiating rent at lease renewal is worth attempting, since most landlords prefer keeping a reliable tenant over the hassle of finding a new one. House hacking, renting out a spare room, splitting costs with roommates, or temporarily living with family while building savings can meaningfully reduce this expense further. Ideally, housing costs stay under half of this overall essentials category. The second major category is transportation. Car payments quietly destroy more wealth than almost any other common expense, since leasing a new vehicle for status typically means paying for years against a rapidly depreciating asset. Buying a reliable used vehicle, at least until income comfortably supports something nicer, tends to be the financially sound choice. In walkable urban areas, eliminating car ownership entirely can free up hundreds of dollars monthly once insurance, maintenance, and parking costs get factored in alongside the payment itself. Once housing and transportation are under control, the final piece is relying on systems rather than willpower. When tired, stressed, or simply bored, willpower reliably fails. That's exactly why wealthy people build automatic systems instead of depending on discipline alone. A simple filtering system helps here. First, ask whether a purchase is an impulse decision. If not, and it fits genuine essential categories, it's generally fine to buy. If it is impulsive, apply a 7-day rule, waiting a full week before purchasing anything non-essential. Most of the time, the desire fades entirely during that window. If the desire still holds after 7 days, ask whether the purchase is driven by brand appeal or genuine value. If it's purely brand-driven, skip it. That's usually clever marketing working as intended, and a comparable unbranded alternative likely performs just as well. Value here means cost relative to actual use. A $60 pair of boots worn 100 times costs 60 cents per wear. Genuinely good value. A $200 pair of designer shoes worn twice costs $100 per wear, poor value regardless of the brand name. Finally, ask whether the purchase genuinely improves your life. If yes, and it's a conscious, intentional decision, proceed. If the honest answer is no, it's likely driven by boredom or a desire to impress someone else and probably isn't worth the money. The final 10%, rewards. The last 10% of income should go toward rewards, the portion that keeps the whole system sustainable rather than feeling like ongoing punishment. Money isn't purely about growth, stability, and essentials. Enjoying it matters too. Notably, 92% of people report overspending after intense saving periods, since saving without any joy built in quickly starts feeling punishing rather than sustainable. This 10% exists specifically to prevent that burnout. To make this spending genuinely guilt-free, it helps to focus on categories that provide lasting value rather than fleeting satisfaction. Vacations and getaways create memories that last far longer than material purchases, while also providing genuine stress relief. Something learned the hard way after ignoring rest entirely while building a business led to stress-induced health problems requiring medical intervention. Hobbies, whether painting, gaming, photography, or anything else genuinely enjoyable, help sustain passion and energy for work outside those activities. Social experiences, dinners, concerts, time with friends matter enormously too. Neglecting this area entirely in pursuit of other goals can quietly cost meaningful relationships over time. Finally, thoughtful gifts for loved ones matter, not for the item itself, but for the connection and thought behind giving it. Practically, open a separate account specifically for this purpose, sometimes called a joy fund. Automate a transfer of exactly 10% of income into it every month, regardless of total income level. The discipline here matters more than the amount. Critically, this fund shouldn't be topped back up from growth, stability, or essentials money when it runs low. Once it hits zero for the month, spending simply waits until the next paycheck. Knowing this fund is genuinely limited naturally encourages more intentional, meaningful use of it. If this fund currently feels small, prioritizing genuine experiences over material purchases tends to provide far more lasting satisfaction per dollar spent. Memorable trips, meaningful time with family, and shared experiences with people who matter rather than material possessions that look impressive but don't actually feel particularly meaningful to hold on to. That's the complete 25, 15, 50, 10 framework: growth, stability, essentials, and rewards, working together as a sustainable system for building real wealth over time, regardless of starting income level.